The rain hammered against the windows of Blackthorn Hostel, a secluded and centuries-old building shrouded in local legends. Kael, a reserved and skeptical student, reluctantly dragged his suitcase up the creaking staircase. His parents had insisted he stay here during his first semester at university, but from the moment he arrived, a heavy, unshakable dread settled over him. The air inside was stale and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Kael's room was on the 3rd floor, notorious among students for bizarre occurrences. Most dismissed the stories as silly pranks or overactive imaginations. But Kael noticed something strange right away. The door to his room bore deep, claw-like scratches. "Welcome to Blackthorn," said Evander, his roommate, flashing a friendly grin. "Don't mind the door, just part of the charm." "Charm?" Kael frowned, his voice laced with unease. "Yeah," Evander replied, dropping his voice to a whisper. "Rumor has it, a girl named Esme lived here decades ago. She went missing one stormy night, and, well, no one really knows what happened. Some say she never left." Kael scoffed, trying to brush off the story, but the chill that crept down his spine betrayed him. That night, Kael lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The wind howled outside, but it was the faint tapping sound that unnerved him. It seemed to come from the corner of the room, just beyond the wardrobe. "Evander?" Kael called softly. There was no reply. His roommate was sound asleep. The tapping grew louder. Kael sat up, his heart racing. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The wardrobe creaked open just an inch. A low, guttural whisper filled the room, so faint he almost thought it was the wind. "Her last gasp is on earth," said the whispering god. "But the murderer of the wife, daughter, children, and slaves—" Kael. He froze. How could it know his name? Suddenly, the door to the wardrobe slammed shut with a deafening bang, jolting Evander awake. "What the hell was that?" Evander shouted, looking around the room. Kael stammered. Someone's in the wardrobe?" Evander grabbed a flashlight and crept toward it. "It's probably just a rat. These old buildings." As he opened the wardrobe, the flashlight flickered and went out. In the dim light of the room, Kael saw a figure, a shadowy silhouette of a girl with long, dripping hair. She stared at them with hollow, lifeless eyes. The door slammed shut again, nearly crushing Evander's hand. The next morning, the warden, Morvina, listened to their story with an unsettling calmness. "You mustn't meddle with what doesn't concern you," she said cryptically. "This hostel has rules. Respect them, and you'll be fine." Kael couldn't shake the feeling that Morvina knew more than she was letting on. Determined to uncover the truth, he and Evander began to dig into the hostel's history. They discovered that Esme, the girl from the legend, had indeed vanished, but what the records didn't say was that her body was never found. That evening, they decided to confront the wardrobe. Armed with a camera and a makeshift weapon, they opened it again. Inside, they found nothing but Kael's clothes. "Nekwe." "It was here," Kael muttered. "I know what I saw." "You're scaring yourself," Evander said, though his voice wavered. But as they turned away, the door slowly creaked open on its own. Inside, they saw it. A handprint, smeared in blood, appearing and disappearing as if someone, or something, was writing a message. The blood-formed words, "Leave while you can." Kael stared at the blood-smeared words, his breath caught in his throat. Evander backed away, his face pale. "But I thought you wanted me," he said slowly. He closed his eyes, like a life vessel ready to obey. "This can't be real," Evander whispered. We need to get out of here. Kael shook his head. No. If we run now, we'll never know the truth. We need to figure out what happened to Esme. Despite their fear, the two began piecing together clues. Late that night, while searching through dusty records in the old library, Kael found a faded photograph tucked inside a leather-bound journal. It was of a group of students standing outside Blackthorn Hostel. Among them was a girl with hauntingly familiar eyes. Esme. Look at this, Kael said, showing the photo to Evander. She's here, but why does she look so out of place? Evander frowned. What do you mean? She's the only one not smiling, Kael said. It's like she knew something. They read further into the journal and discovered it belonged to Esme herself. Her entries described a sinister presence in the hostel, a dark force she called the Keeper. She wrote about how the Keeper demanded sacrifices, luring students into its grasp. Her last entry read, I hear it calling me. Tonight, I will face it. If I don't return, warn them. No one is safe here. Inside the building, the lions are displayed on the main screen as they watch the darker side of themselves. There is ever-growing scar tissue. Determined to uncover the truth, Kael and Evander returned to their room. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped sharply, and the sound of footsteps echoed outside their door. Do you hear that? Evander asked, clutching a flashlight. Kael nodded, his heart pounding. It's coming from the hallway. They opened the door cautiously and found themselves face to face with Morvenna, the warden. You should have left, she said, her voice low and chilling. It's too late now. Before they could question her, the hallway lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, a deep, guttural growl resonated, followed by Esme's ghostly figure appearing at the end of the corridor. She's here, Evander whispered. But something was wrong. Esme wasn't alone. Behind her, a shadowy figure loomed, tall, featureless, and radiating malice. The Keeper, Kael muttered. The shadow lunged toward them, its presence overwhelming. Kael and Evander ran, but every door they tried was locked. Behind them, Esme's ghost wailed, her voice a mix of agony and warning. She's not trying to hurt us, Kael shouted. She's trying to help. They stopped and turned to face her. Kael held up the journal. Esme, tell us how to stop it. Esme's translucent form trembled as she pointed to the basement. Destroy its anchor, she whispered. What anchor? Evander asked, panicking. But before she could answer, the Keeper's shadow enveloped her, silencing her screams. Kael and Evander sprinted to the basement, the air growing heavier with each step. The door creaked open to reveal a room filled with strange artifacts and symbols. At the center stood an old, blood-stained mirror, and the mirror flashed. The door to the basement flew open. At the center stood an old, blood-stained mirror. Kael said, rushing toward the mirror. Slade suddenly appeared in front of the mirror. As he raised a metal rod to smash it, the Keeper materialized, blocking his path. Its hollow voice echoed, You cannot destroy me. I am eternal. Evander threw a lit lantern at the creature, causing it to recoil. Do it now, he shouted. Kael swung the rod with all his strength, shattering the mirror into 1,000 shards. A deafening roar shook the building as the Keeper dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, screaming in rage. The hostel fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like they had won. But as they climbed the stairs, they found Morvenna waiting for them. You fools, she said, her voice trembling with anger. The mirror wasn't just its anchor, it was its prison. Now, it's free. Kael's stomach sank. What have we done? The walls of the hostel began to bleed, and ghostly figures emerged from every corner, their hollow eyes filled with despair. The Keeper's voice echoed one last time. Blackthorn is mine. Kael and Evander ran for their lives, but the hostel twisted and shifted, trapping them in an endless maze. The last thing Kael saw was Esme's tear-streaked face as she whispered, "I'm sorry."